The world has learned that it can no longer afford to settle disputes by force. It is the responsibility of the world's diplomats to prevent future international wars. Diplomacy today, in the most vital role of its history, must be the diplomacy of intelligence, of character, of justice, and it must be practiced by diplomats who exemplify these qualities. George S. Messersmith, present United States Ambassador to Argentina, has proved his right to a high rank in such diplomatic corps.
The National Broadcasting Company presents Tales of the Foreign Service, a feature in NBC's University of the Air, written and produced in cooperation with the State Department and dedicated to the personnel of the Foreign Service. The material used in this series is based upon confidential files of the State Department, much of it never before released to the public. Tonight's story is a portrait of George S. Messersmith, career diplomat who has served on all the rungs of the Foreign Service ladder, and who, as much as any one man, emphasizes the importance of our State Department in maintaining world peace. American representatives abroad, George S. Messersmith, present ambassador to Argentina, may be said to fit the ideal requirements for the modern diplomat. Of primary importance is the fact that he knows its subject, both in theory and practice. His is the thorough knowledge obtained by experience in every phase of diplomatic and consular work in all parts of the world. He is an ambassador who has reached the highest rung of the Foreign Service from the lowly position of consul. Before entering the service of the State Department, George Messersmith was successful as a teacher and as an administrator in the Delaware public school system. His first post in the State Department was a local one, when he was assigned on June 25, 1914, as vice consul at Fort Erie. He served at Fort Erie for 2 years before being transferred to Curacao, Dutch West Indies. It was at Curacao that George Messersmith was to meet his first serious problem in the Foreign Service. Thunder and rain. Well, there goes the celebration I'm planned for.
But, George, this isn't our anniversary, dear.
Don't you know what today is, my dear wife? It's our 3rd anniversary in the Foreign Service.
Oh, why, so it is. 3 years ago, we were at Fort Erie.
And it was raining then.
Rain's good luck for us, George.
Any remarks on the occasion, Mrs. Messersmith?
Well, now, let's see. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very proud indeed to be a vice consul's wife.
Are you?
Am I? Only, George, it is a little hard on our pocketbook.
Yes, it's a luxury we really can't afford.
I wondered if you realized we've gone into our savings this past year.
Yes, about $500.
You make $2,000 as vice consul, and it's cost us $2,500. That doesn't seem fair.
It isn't. You've been a marvelous manager, or we couldn't have done this well.
It would be nice if we could afford to move out of it. I'm sorry, darling, I shouldn't have said that.
You're right. Here we are, representing the United States government in Central America and living in the slums. Why, we're not doing any better than the average mechanic who's answerable to nobody but himself.
Maybe that gives us an incentive, though.
Incentive, my eye. Just wait till I get to the office tomorrow. I'm going to write a letter to Washington.
That may cost you your job?
If the truth can cost a man his job, yes.
With George Messersmith, to see an injustice was to try to remedy it. The State Department were so moved by the straightforward letter they received from this lowly vice consul that he was raised to Class 8, which carried a salary of $2,500 plus a temporary post allowance of $500. Congress, however, was slow to act on adequate salaries for all its Foreign Service clerks. And later in his career, George Messersmith was able to do for others what he had done for himself. In the spring of 1919, the State Department gave Messersmith the responsible post in Antwerp. He was here for 9 years, first as consul, then as consul general, then as dean of the consular corps. He achieved remarkable results in building up the trade and shipping of the United States. Promotion of trade is as important in the duties of a consul as the protection of trade. Messersmith, having lived in a small town in his youth, understood the problems of small groups and small nations. As an example of his methods in making friends in the Foreign Service, there is a story of how he gave help to an Antwerp burgomaster.
It is good of you, Herr Messersmith, to interest yourself in the municipal affairs of Antwerpen.
Herr Bürgermeister, it is you who do the honor to let me accompany you on these inspection trips. In this way, I learn the problems of your country.
Oh, the problems of Antwerpen are many. You see that factory over to the right? What a headache that building is to me.
What's the trouble?
Tomorrow, the workers go on strike. So many people out of work, and export cease for days, maybe weeks or months. They are at a deadlock with the owner.
What is the problem? Wages?
Yeah.
Are their demands reasonable?
Nine. If they were, they would be met.
Are they paid enough to live on? After all, the cost of living has gone up since the war.
That factory has always paid a living wage. They are paying the same they paid in 1912, and it has always been enough.
But this is 1919. The franc is not the same franc as it was in 1912, even if they are the same workers.
Oh, I had not thought of that.
I imagine the owner is getting better prices for his product, too. I think if you would look into the matter, you might find that no one has stopped long enough to consider the changing time.
You have given me an idea, Herr. May I take you to the consulate? I have business to attend to.
A little later in the day,
Herr Messersmith.
Good news, Herr Bürgermeister?
You have settled the strike.
I'm sure it was your diplomacy, Herr Bürgermeister.
And I have brought you a present. Look. In the history of Antwerpen, only 43 sets of these have ever been given to anyone. They are usually given to honor a local citizen or a distinguished writer. They are like a medal.
Woodcuts. They're beautiful.
They are a history of Antwerpen to remind you of this day and our thanks.
In 1928, when George Messersmith received news that he was to leave Antwerp to go to Buenos Aires as consul general, he was given a farewell dinner. The only consular officer ever to be given a formal dinner of appreciation at the City Hall. Here he was paid tribute by both Belgians and the American colony.
Ladies and gentlemen, please come to order.
After dinner speeches have fallen into some disrepute, so I will make mine brief. It is singularly appropriate that our farewell dinner for George Messersmith is given here at the headquarters of the American Club, which was formed by our guest of honor. His record in Antwerp speaks far more eloquently than any words that I might add. Suffice it to say that, thanks to George Messersmith, the office of the Consul General at Antwerp has become an outpost of the United States, where every problem of Americans abroad receives prompt, personal, and sympathetic attention. The great French diplomat Talleyrand once said that it requires a great deal more knowledge to be a good consul than to be a successful diplomat. Because George Messersmith was a good consul, he was already far on the road to success in the top ranks of foreign service. In Buenos Aires, Messersmith inaugurated tours of inspection of consular posts. He became familiar with conditions in Sao Paulo, Montevideo, Rosario, Santiago, Valparaiso, Asunción, and Rio de Janeiro. His criticism of our consular quarters in Rio was typical.
I am surprised that you have not complained of conditions here in Rio de Janeiro before.
I didn't know there was any use in complaining, Mr. Messersmith. Consular quarters here have always been in this condition.
But, man, the United States government is suffering a loss of prestige and influence.
I know that.
These
but
quarters are small, inadequate. The furniture is literally worm-eaten.
But what am I to do?
Include these conditions in your report. Otherwise, as your consul general, I can't help you, not knowing about them. This situation can and will be remedied.
And so the State Department was informed again, thanks to Mr. Messersmith, of lost opportunities, and preventive measures were taken. Today, as a result of this early groundwork of inspection, Brazil has excellent consular facilities, a fine chancellery building, and a magnificent embassy. Typical of the kind of service his name was to become a byword for was this incident.
Can anybody in South America speak American?
What seems to be the trouble, Mr. Baldwin?
I can't find an interpreter, and I've been unable to get my contracts translated. I'm losing $10,000 worth of business a day.
Well, this consulate can furnish you an interpreter. Why didn't you call on us before?
Eh? I thought all you fellas did was stamp passports or hold up visas. Specialists in red tape.
We fancy our job is to unravel red tape for American citizens, Mr. Baldwin. Suppose you outline your problem, and we'll see what we can do.
A flood of letters from American businessmen in South America poured into the State Department during Messersmith's 2 years in Buenos Aires. Here was a State Department representative who could and did give all information desired. But although Messersmith was solving other people's problems, he and his wife were confronted by a situation which reminded him of an earlier post.
Remember the good old days, George, when we were only $500 a year in the red? Do you know what it's costing us this year?
Let's have a look at the budget.
Here you are in Class 2 with a salary of $8,000, and we're spending $17,000 a year.
$9,000 in the red.
Our house alone, without heat or light, costs $3,600. On that, we can't entertain, we can't buy any clothing, and we have no leave allowance.
Well, we never take any leave anyway, do
And
we?
the cost of living here is the highest in the world. I've talked to other wives in the consulate here in Buenos Aires. Do you know that the United States allows less than any other country for their foreign service people? Madame Latour raised a faint eyebrow at the situation. Darling, it's not that I care what she thinks or anybody else. But after all, we're not here as private individuals, George.
I guess this called for another letter.
But the State Department did not acquiesce. They said
No. There would be no allowance to officers with salaries over $5,000 a year.
Messersmith replied,
But consular officers do not have the same privileges as diplomats. Our consuls pay auto expenses, club dues, admission fees. Diplomats receive post allowance. Don't you see that our government suffers a loss of prestige if the consul fails to keep up his end? Don't you think it would be a good idea if the State Department collected specific data about each of its foreign service posts and made a proportionate allotment?
George Messersmith won a victory in his persistent efforts in behalf of the interests of foreign service representatives in the ultimate bill signed in June 1930, providing for
Furnished living quarters, heat, light, and household equipment. Government-owned or rented buildings.
the groundwork for this first step in lifting the financial burden had been laid in 1924, following Messersmith's efforts when he was in Curaçao. This was the Rogers Bill, the Magna Carta of our present foreign service, which raised the general level of salaries, provided for small representation allowances for diplomatic missions, and for the first kind granted retirement pay and disability allowances. Step by step, Messersmith's own experiences were proving valuable to others, and his reforms were becoming laws. However, following on the heels of these improvements came the Depression. Messersmith had been sent from Buenos Aires to Berlin. In the midst of financial difficulties, also present in Berlin, with salaries reduced 15%, post allowances abolished, rental allowances reduced 65%, dollar depreciated, cost of living high, exchange rate against the dollar, the critical world deflation of money in these troubled times was contributing to a new and more sinister problem.
My name is Hermann Goering, Mr. Messersmith. You have heard of me, Mr. Consul General, eh?
Have a seat, Mr. Goering. What can I do for you?
I am a restless man. I would prefer to look at your office, particularly that map of North America.
Are you interested in making a trip?
Huh? One of these days, perhaps. Not now. This section below, what you call South America, that is one of our spheres of influence.
Really? We regard them as good neighbors of ours.
It will be needless to ask one of these days if you have heard of me, Mr. Messerschmitt, or of Hitler, or of the Nazi Party. One of these days, we will be your neighbor to the south.
Kindly stop pounding the table, Mr. Goering. This is my house. No one pounds the table here but me. If there is any pounding to do, I'll do it.
Contrary to opinions that the State Department was slow to realize the Nazi danger, George Messersmith knew its danger. He watched the growth of Nazism and was quick to recognize its manifestations. Driving through the streets of Berlin.
Germany seems like a nightmare, doesn't it, George? Look at those children playing soldier over there. Why, they can't be more than 5 or 6 years old, really.
No, they aren't playing soldier. They're training to wage war.
George, do you think Germany wants war?
I think the country wants peace, but it isn't a peaceful country. These Nazis are developing the psychology that the whole world is against Germany and that it lies defenseless before the world.
His keen reactions to what was going on about him were all embodied in a memorandum in 1933 to the Under-Secretary of State.
My dear Mr. Phillips, I am forced to assert definitely that these Nazis are not satisfied with the existing map of Europe. They are belligerent and aggressive. They desire a period of peace for several years, during which they can gradually rearm and discipline their people. This period may be 5 years, 10 years, or longer. But the more completely their experiment succeeds, the more certain is a large-scale war in Europe someday. These people are madmen.
While in Berlin, Messersmith also was a spark plug for additional reforms in not only the financial condition of foreign service clerks and employees, but he also introduced a close coordination between capital and provincial posts. It was he who put forth the suggestion that the ambassador and consul general visit all posts and combine these visits with a formal call on the municipal authorities in each German city.
Do you know, Herr Ambassador Dodd, this is the first visit to Stuttgart by the chief of a foreign mission since 1918.
Speaking for the ambassador and myself, you've made us feel more than welcome.
Yeah, it is more important that America and Germany be friends, nicht wahr?
Herr Schmidt, die Spiele beginnen.
Jawohl. Excuse me one moment. The athletic games are about to start.
You see what I mean, Mr. Dodd?
I am inclined to agree with you entirely, Mr. Messersmith. This was a brilliant scheme to combine the visit to our consulate with its inspection of Germany.
Have you heard about the negotiations between Germany and Japan?
Do you think this is so or just rumor?
I have good reason to believe it's true.
Then it seems to me, then, that Germany has plans beyond Europe.
Yes. But I still believe that Germany could be led into being a good neighbor or into being a bad one, depending on her government.
By the end of his tour of duty in Berlin, Messersmith had decided without question that Germany was headed in direction which could only carry ruin to it and would create a situation dangerous to world peace. While keeping an eye on the Germans, George Messersmith also had a hunch about Russia.
Will you please sign these visas, Mr. Messersmith?
Quite a stack of them.
Yes. For these Russians who are going to the United States. That one on top is the one who just returned from America.
Would you please show him in? And incidentally, it's very important to give the very best of service to these men. I'm particularly interested in them. Will you treat them with all cordiality?
Yes, sir. Mr. Ostroff. Yes? Something wrong?
I'd like to see you, Mr. Ostroff. Please, close the door.
Yes, sir.
Please be seated. I understand you've just returned from the United States.
Yes, I have.
Don't be nervous. I was just a little homesick for news. What was your business in America?
I am an engineer, Mr. Messersmith.
I hope your trip was a success. Did you like America?
Liked America very much.
Did you get what you went after?
Yes. We are building a dam, and we saw your great Boulder Dam in Colorado. Also the one in Tennessee. You know, America's like Russia. I like your people. They laugh at the same things we do.
Messersmith was one of the first to realize the incipient growth of Russia, keenly alive to her awakening 2 years before we officially recognized her. Messersmith, probably the country's greatest career diplomat, is a human and friendly personality, and his ability to project warmth, even at the height of his efficiency, is one of the great secrets of his effectiveness. From Berlin, Messersmith was sent to Vienna, where he wrote on February 8, 1935,
There is no use in having any illusions as to what Hitler and the party want. They have their eyes on Memel, Alsace-Lorraine, and the eastern frontier. They nourish just as strongly the hope to get the Ukraine for the surplus German population and to get the fertile lands which Germany must have. Austria is a definite objective, the absorption or hegemony over the whole of southeastern Europe, a definite policy.
During his tour of foreign service in Germany and Austria, he was to make other important observations which were called upon as late as 1945 in the trial of war criminals at Nuremberg. His penetrating analysis of the European diplomatic picture in those days and his biographical data on such German figures as Dr. von Stuckert, Kurt von Bohlen, and von Schrader carried great weight. In 1937, Messersmith was recalled to the United States as Assistant Secretary of State for Administration, where he served until 1940. Although the public of the United States was not then aware of the full import of the Nazi rise to power, President Roosevelt and Secretary of State Hull were, and began to reorganize the Foreign Service. Messersmith, in his new job, in which he was also Budget and Fiscal Officer, pointed out the important fact that the State Department receives far less than any of the other 10 executive positions.
Yet it undeniably holds a premier position in importance and prestige.
Messersmith was responsible for prompt promotions for Foreign Service officers, better staff positions, better representation allowances, and living wages for underpaid foreign clerks. In the Reorganization Act of 1939, he transferred the activities and personnel of the Foreign Service from the Department of Commerce and Department of Agriculture to the State Department. This consolidation of duplicating agencies actually saved the United States over $100,000. To the State Department were added under his administration two important divisions, the Division of Cultural Relations and the Division of International Communications. In 1940, with war threatening the United States, Messersmith was sent as ambassador to Cuba. Colonel Batista, a political strongman, was then president, and the United States needed Cuban support. Cuba's quick entrance into the war after Pearl Harbor, followed by an agreement between the two countries coordinating military and naval measures for the duration, testify to the skill and understanding of his good neighbor diplomacy. After his successes in Cuba, he was moved to another post south of our border. He succeeded Josephus Daniels as ambassador to Mexico. An amusing story is told of him on the golf course there.
As you can see, Mr. Camacho, I'm not really a golfer.
I think you are being very modest, Mr. Messersmith.
Let's see how our scores tally up.
We do not go by individual scorecards in Mexico, Mr. Messersmith.
My score is 130 for 18 holes.
The official score, according to my foreign minister, is the president, that is 79. The foreign minister, 80, and Mr. Messersmith, 81.
The scores ran strictly according to protocol with little regard for golf. In Mexico, George Messersmith cemented already friendly relationships during the war. While there, he unified conflicting American agencies in Mexico City. Other items to his credit were
Food in emergencies.
more efficient railway service, setting up and financing of a 100-octane gasoline plant,
Assistance in the construction of the Inter-American Highway.
obtaining transportation for shipment of bananas and other fruits, help in the ticklish settlement of the petroleum problem. He was also called in on the Inter-American Conference in the spring of 1945 to help with the act of Chapultepec. Today, George Messersmith is ambassador to another world trouble spot, Argentina, where it is his task to help eliminate fascist influence so that the United States can, in good faith, do business with it. The old convention of a diplomat as a privileged spy or an honest man sent abroad to lie for his country is no longer satisfying. The diplomat of today is not a foppish socialite bedecked in white spats and a cane. He is no longer a lame duck politician, nor a wealthy contributor to the right party's campaign chest. The successful diplomat of this era is a keen, hard-headed, shrewd businessman. This is so because diplomacy is the conduct of a nation's business abroad. A nation's business is a large enterprise. It is not merely an economic or a financial transaction. It is also a political undertaking which requires delicate adjustment, intelligent understanding, and far-seeing cooperation. Successful diplomacy must be based upon the fundamentals of justice, so administered as to be mutually advantageous. So said of him his biographer and friend, Graham Stewart. George Messersmith stands after 32 years of faithful service as a model of top-drawer career diplomacy in 1946. You've been listening to Tales of the Foreign Service, a new series of the NBC University of the Air, written and produced in cooperation with the State Department, and based upon confidential State Department files.
It is a dark brown or black mineral.